Behind the controversial facade of television's first all-black sitcom lay a treasure trove of bizarre secrets. A 70-year-old vaudeville star, coaxed out of retirement, fired a gun over leftover roast beef. One cast member secretly directed the first black science fiction film, and the show's premiere was catastrophically timed to coincide with the NAACP's national convention. These strange tales reveal the human drama lurking beneath one of TV's most polarizing programs. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Amos and Andy. Fact 1. The 4-year talent hunt. When Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll decided to bring their hit radio show Amos and Andy to television in the late 1940s, they faced a problem that seems almost unbelievable today. For more than 20 years, these two white men had been voicing black characters on the radio. But television would make their racial masquerade impossible to maintain. What followed was one of the most extensive and bizarre casting searches in early television history. Starting in 1946, Gosden and Correll began what would become a 4-year nationwide hunt for black actors to fill the main roles. They traveled across the country, attending performances by black theater troupes and holding auditions in cities from coast to coast. But here's where the story gets truly strange. The producers initially had no intention of letting these actors actually speak their own lines. The original plan was for Gosden and Correll to continue providing the voices for Amos, Andy, and Kingfish, while the hired black actors would simply move their mouths in sync with the pre-recorded dialogue. Essentially, they wanted to create a live-action version of their radio ventriloquist act, with real people serving as human puppets for the white creators' voices. This bizarre concept would have resulted in something like a televised blackface performance, but with actual black performers silently acting out the movements. Fortunately, someone involved in the production recognized how problematic and technically challenging this approach would be. The lip-sync idea was eventually abandoned, and the producers instead chose to simply instruct the hired actors on how to match the vocal patterns and speech styles that Gosden and Correll had established on radio. The 4-year search finally concluded in 1950 when they assembled their cast, including Alvin Childress as Amos, Spencer Williams as Andy, and Tim Moore as Kingfish. These actors brought their own interpretations to the roles while still maintaining some connection to the original radio characterizations. The extensive casting process had transformed from a quest to find human marionettes into a genuine opportunity for black performers to showcase their talents on national television. Fact 2. Tim Moore's Rosie incident. In January of 1958, Tim Moore, the beloved actor who played Kingfish on Amos and Andy, found himself making headlines for one of the most unusual celebrity arrests in Hollywood history. The 71-year-old performer had been dealing with what he considered freeloading relatives who had been staying at his home, and his patience finally reached its breaking point over something as simple as leftover roast beef. Moore had been saving the remains of a New Year's Eve roast beef dinner when he came home to discover that his stepson, stepdaughter, and her husband had consumed what was left of the meat. This wasn't just about one meal, though. Moore had grown increasingly frustrated with these family members who he felt were taking advantage of his hospitality and living off his earnings from the television show without contributing anything in return. When Moore confronted the 3 relatives about eating his saved dinner, they responded in kind, leading to a heated argument in his own home. Rather than resort to physical violence, which he easily could have done given his background as a successful boxer in his younger years, Moore chose a different approach. He went upstairs to retrieve a pistol and returned to fire a warning shot into the air, not intending to hurt anyone, but clearly wanting to make a dramatic point about his displeasure. The police were called to the scene, and when they arrived, they found Moore in a surprisingly good mood despite the circumstances. He freely admitted to firing the gun and even seemed to enjoy telling the officers his side of the story. Moore told the police, "You remember me? I'm the old Kingfish, boys. I'm the one you want. I fired that shot. I didn't want to hit anyone, although I could have anyway. "You should have seen the relations scatter when I fired that gun." The police later reported that Moore was the funniest arrest they had ever made, as he continued to entertain them with jokes and stories throughout the booking process. Moore was charged with a misdemeanor for discharging a firearm, but the incident ultimately worked in his favor. The publicity from what became known as the roast beef incident led to renewed interest in Moore's career, resulting in talk show appearances and nightclub bookings. Fact 3. Spencer Williams's secret sci-fi career. Long before Spencer Williams became known to television audiences as the gullible Andy Brown on Amos and Andy, he had already made history in a completely different genre that most viewers never knew about. In 1940, 11 years before the TV show premiered, Williams wrote and starred in a low-budget horror film called Son of Ingagi, which film historians now recognize as the first science fiction horror movie to feature an entirely black cast. The film told the story of a newlywed couple who inherit a house from a mysterious doctor who had recently returned from Africa. What they don't know is that the doctor has brought back more than just souvenirs from her travels. Hidden in the house is a creature called Engina, described as a missing link between humans and apes, who becomes violently dangerous when he drinks a special potion that sends him into murderous rages. Williams based the screenplay on his own short story titled House of Horror, and the movie was produced by SAC Amusement Enterprises, a Dallas-based company that specialized in what were then called race films. These were low-budget movies made specifically for black audiences during the era of segregated theaters, when major Hollywood studios rarely cast black actors in leading roles. What made Son of Ingagi particularly groundbreaking was not just its all-black cast, but also the fact that the characters were portrayed as middle-class professionals and homeowners rather than the stereotypical servants or laborers that black actors were usually limited to playing in mainstream films. The movie featured black characters as doctors, lawyers, and business owners, presenting a vision of black life that was almost never seen in 1940s cinema. Williams didn't just write and act in the film, he also helped behind the camera and worked with his own film projector to show his movies to audiences throughout the southern United States. This hands-on approach to filmmaking and distribution made him one of the few black filmmakers working during that era, alongside pioneers like Oscar Micheaux. The success of Son of Ingagi led producer Alfred Sack to offer Williams the opportunity to write and direct his own feature film, which became The Blood of Jesus in 1941. Most of Williams's films were considered lost until they were discovered in a warehouse in Tyler, Texas in 1983, decades after his death. Fact 4. The catastrophic premiere timing. When CBS scheduled the television premiere of Amos and Andy for June 28, 1951, network executives apparently failed to check what else was happening that same week in the civil rights community. In what turned out to be one of the most poorly timed debuts in television history, the show launched during the exact same week as the NAACP's annual national convention, creating a perfect storm of controversy that would haunt the series throughout its brief run. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People had already been monitoring the development of the television adaptation with growing concern, knowing that the radio version had long been criticized for its stereotypical portrayals of Black Americans. However, the timing of the premiere meant that hundreds of the organization's most influential leaders and activists were gathered together in one place, making it easy for them to coordinate an immediate and powerful response to the show's debut. Within days of the first episode airing, the NAACP released a detailed bulletin outlining their objections to the program, stating that it tends to strengthen the conclusion among uninformed and prejudiced people that Negroes are inferior, lazy, dumb, and dishonest. The organization's leadership was able to use their national convention as a platform to organize protests and media campaigns against the show, reaching newspapers and radio stations across the country with their message. This coincidental timing amplified what might have been a more gradual buildup of criticism into an immediate national controversy. The NAACP's coordinated response during their convention week meant that negative coverage of the show appeared in newspapers nationwide, just as audiences were forming their first impressions of the television version. The organization's bulletin went on to criticize specific character types, claiming that every character in this one and only TV show with an all-Negro cast is either a clown or a crook, and that Negro doctors are shown as quacks and thieves, while Negro lawyers are shown as slippery cowards. Having their national convention coincide with the premiere gave the NAACP the organizational structure and media attention needed to make these criticisms immediately visible to the public. Whether CBS was aware of the convention timing and chose to proceed anyway, or simply overlooked this crucial scheduling conflict, remains unclear. But the result was that Amos and Andy faced organized opposition from its very first week on the air. Fact 5. Tim Moore's 15-child family origins. Tim Moore, who would later become famous as the scheming kingfish on Amos and Andy, came from one of the largest families imaginable in late 19th century America. Born Harry Roscoe Moore on December 9, 1887, in Rock Island, Illinois, he was one of 15 children in a household where his father worked as a night watchman at a local brewery to support the enormous family. Growing up in such a crowded household meant that young Tim had to find ways to stand out and contribute to the family's survival from an early age. He and his friend Romeo Washburn would dance for pennies in the streets of Rock Island, developing the performance skills that would eventually make Tim famous. The need to help support his large family led him to drop out of grammar school when he was just 11 years old. But rather than taking a regular job, he chose a path that seemed almost impossible for a black child from Illinois in 1898. Tim and Romeo joined a traveling vaudeville act called Cora Miskell and Her Gold Dust Twins, which became the launching pad for what would be a remarkable 50-plus-year career in show business. The act was built around Cora Miskell, who performed with the two young boys as her supporting players, and their combination of music, comedy, and dancing proved to be incredibly popular with audiences across the United States. What made this early success even more extraordinary was that the act became so well-known and profitable that it eventually toured internationally, taking Tim Moore and his fellow performers to Europe, when such opportunities were almost unheard of for black entertainers. The European tour exposed young Tim to different styles of performance and entertainment, broadening his understanding of comedy and stagecraft in ways that would influence his work for decades to come. This early international experience gave Moore a level of sophistication and worldliness that was rare among performers of his background and era. The success of Cora Miskell and Her Gold Dust Twins also established him as a professional entertainer while he was still a teenager, setting the foundation for a career that would span vaudeville, Broadway, radio, and eventually television. The skills he developed during those early years with the traveling act, particularly his ability to work with different types of audiences and adapt his comedy to various situations, would serve him well when he later took on the role of Kingfish. Fact 6. Alvin Childress cast the Kingfish. In one of the most unusual casting arrangements in television history, Alvin Childress found himself in the position of choosing his own co-star after landing the role of Amos Jones on the upcoming TV series. When producers Charles Correll and Freeman Guston hired Childress a full year before the show was scheduled to begin production, they made an unexpected decision that would fundamentally shape the program's future by turning the search for the most important character over to their newly hired lead actor. Childress had originally auditioned for the role of Kingfish himself, but Correll and Gosden decided he was better suited to play the level-headed Amos instead. Rather than continuing the search themselves, they gave Childress the responsibility of finding the right actor to portray George Kingfish Stevens, the scheming lodge leader who would become the show's breakout character and central figure. The search attracted numerous high-profile candidates, including some of the most famous black entertainers of the era who were eager to break into the new medium of television. Among the most notable candidates was Cab Calloway, the internationally famous bandleader and performer known for his energetic stage presence and distinctive vocal style. Calloway seemed like a natural choice, given his experience in entertainment and his ability to command an audience, but he was ultimately rejected for a surprisingly superficial reason. According to Childress, Freeman Gosden dismissed Calloway as a candidate because of his straight hair, apparently feeling that the character of Kingfish needed to be portrayed by someone with a different physical appearance. This decision reflected the complex and often problematic attitudes about Black identity and appearance that influenced casting decisions during that era, even when the producers were specifically seeking Black actors for their show. Childress later shared that many famous men, both with and without actual acting experience, wanted to play the role of Kingfish, recognizing it as a potentially career-defining opportunity in the emerging world of television. After considering various candidates and weighing their different strengths and weaknesses, Childress ultimately selected Tim Moore, an old-time vaudeville comedian who had been semi-retired and working in a factory in Baltimore. Moore's selection proved to be inspired, as his decades of experience in live performance and his natural comedic timing made him the undisputed star of the television version, transforming Kingfish into one of the first memorable characters of the television age. Fact 7. The $100 fine celebrity. What started as an embarrassing arrest for firing a gun over leftover roast beef ended up becoming the best thing that could have happened to Tim Moore's career in his later years. After the 71-year-old former Kingfish was sentenced to just a $100 fine and a year's probation for his domestic pistol incident, the unusual story caught the attention of entertainment industry bookers who recognized the publicity value of Moore's colorful personality and natural storytelling ability. The roast beef incident had generated newspaper coverage across the country, reminding the public that the beloved Kingfish was still alive, and apparently as entertaining in real life as he had been on television. This media attention led directly to Moore being invited as a guest on The Tonight Show, which at that time was hosted by Jack Paar, one of the most influential talk show hosts of the era. Moore's appearance on the show was a huge success, as he regaled Paar and the audience with stories from his long career and even shared some clean jokes from his old vaudeville act. Moore had always been proud of performing family-friendly material throughout his career, often stating, "I never told a joke that I couldn't tell to my mother." And this reputation for clean humor made him perfect for 1950s television appearances. His natural charisma and decades of experience working with live audiences translated perfectly to the talk show format, where his ability to think quickly and entertain spontaneously made him a memorable guest. The success of his Tonight Show appearance opened doors to other television programs and led to what became a highly profitable engagement at the Mocambo nightclub, one of Los Angeles's most prestigious entertainment venues. The Mocambo was known for hosting major stars and celebrities, so Moore's booking there represented a significant career revival for someone who had been largely out of the spotlight since Amos and Andy ended in 1953. The entertainment industry also honored Moore with a testimonial tribute dinner organized by the Friars Club, a prestigious organization of comedians and entertainers. This recognition from his peers demonstrated that despite the controversy surrounding Amos and Andy, Moore was still respected within the professional comedy community for his decades of contributions to American entertainment. The roast beef incident had inadvertently reminded everyone that Tim Moore was still a talented performer, with stories worth hearing and jokes worth telling. Fact 8. Spencer Williams vs. Freeman. Gosden, behind the scenes of Amos and Andy, a significant creative conflict was brewing between Spencer Williams, the accomplished black actor and filmmaker who played Andy, and Freeman Gosden, the white co-creator of the original radio series who served as one of the television show's producers. Williams, who had spent years writing, directing, and starring in his own films where he controlled how black characters were portrayed, found himself increasingly frustrated with Gosden's insistence on maintaining the speech patterns and characterizations that had been established during the radio era. The tension centered around how Andy Brown should speak and behave on television, with Williams pushing for a more dignified and realistic portrayal, while Gosden wanted to preserve the dialect and mannerisms that audiences expected from the radio version. Williams had extensive experience creating complex, three-dimensional black characters in his race films, where he had the freedom to show African Americans as doctors, business owners, and intelligent professionals without resorting to exaggerated speech patterns or stereotypical behavior. This clash represented a fundamental disagreement about the direction of black representation in entertainment, with Williams advocating for progress while Gosden remained attached to the formulas that had made the radio show successful. Williams understood that television was a visual medium that would make the characters' behavior and speech more noticeable and potentially more damaging than it had been on radio, where audiences could only hear voices without seeing faces or body language. The conflict was particularly challenging for Williams because he was not just an actor for hire, but an accomplished filmmaker who had spent years developing his own vision of how black stories should be told. His background in creating and controlling his own film projects made it difficult for him to accept creative direction that he felt was moving backward rather than forward in terms of racial representation. Williams had worked hard to establish himself as a serious artist through his films like Son of Ingagi and The Blood of Jesus, where he had proven that black actors could carry complex stories without relying on dialect humor or stereotypical characterizations. Being asked to perform in a style that he felt was beneath his artistic standards and potentially harmful to his community created ongoing tension throughout the production of the television series, highlighting the complicated position that black performers found themselves in when trying to work within the predominantly white entertainment industry of the 1950s. Fact time. The lip-sync plan that never was in. What would have been one of the most bizarre experiments in early television history, Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll seriously considered creating a version of Amos and Andy, where black actors would silently mouth words while the two white creators provided all the voices from behind the cameras. This unprecedented concept would have essentially turned the television show into a live-action ventriloquist performance, with real human beings serving as puppets for the original radio performers who were determined to maintain control over the characters they had created more than 20 years earlier. According to newspaper reports from 1950, Gosden and Correll initially believed they could preserve the exact vocal characterizations that had made the radio show so popular while still meeting the visual demands of television by hiring black actors to provide the physical performances. The plan called for the actors to learn precise lip movements that would match pre-recorded dialogue tracks, creating a synchronized performance that would allow viewers to see black faces while still hearing the familiar voices that radio audiences had grown to love. This concept represented an almost unimaginable fusion of outdated entertainment traditions, combining elements of blackface minstrelsy with ventriloquism and early television technology. The producers apparently believed that audiences would accept this strange hybrid format, not realizing how technically challenging and artistically problematic such an arrangement would be to execute successfully on a weekly television series. The lip-sync plan also revealed how reluctant Gosden and Correll were to give up the vocal control they had maintained over these characters since 1928, even when it became clear that television would require a completely different approach to the material. Their attachment to preserving the exact speech patterns and vocal inflections they had developed on radio led them to consider this complicated workaround rather than simply allowing black actors to interpret the roles in their own voices. Fortunately for everyone involved, the practical difficulties of coordinating precise lip-sync performances week after week, combined with what must have been concerns about how such an unusual format would be received by audiences and critics, led to the abandonment of this plan. Instead, The producers chose the much more sensible approach of instructing the hired actors on the general vocal styles they wanted, while allowing them to speak their own lines naturally, creating a television show rather than an elaborate technical experiment. Fact 10. Johnny Lee's 5% Calhoun. One of the most memorable characters on the Amos and Andy television series was the incompetent lawyer Algonquin J. Calhoun, played by Johnny Lee, but few viewers knew that this shyster attorney had originally gone by a completely different name that revealed exactly how he conducted his questionable legal business. When the character was first introduced in radio episodes during 1948 and 1949, he was known simply as 5% Calhoun, a nickname that told listeners everything they needed to know about his unusual fee structure. The character's original moniker was based on his practice of charging clients exactly 5% of whatever money he managed to recover for them in legal settlements or court cases, rather than charging the standard hourly rates or flat fees that legitimate lawyers typically used. This pricing method was designed to make Calhoun's services seem incredibly affordable to potential clients, especially those who might not have much money to pay a lawyer up front. But it also suggested that he was more interested in quick settlements than in providing quality legal representation. The 5% nickname served as both a marketing tool for the character's legal services and a warning sign about the kind of lawyer he actually was, since any attorney willing to work for such a low percentage was probably not very confident about winning substantial awards for his clients. The name also hinted at the character's tendency to take on cases that more reputable lawyers might avoid, since he could afford to represent almost anyone as long as there was some possibility of recovering even a small amount of money. By the time the television series began production in 1951, the character had evolved to become Algonquin J. Calhoun, a more formal-sounding name that better suited the visual medium of television while still maintaining the character's essential nature as a bumbling, ethically questionable legal practitioner. The change from 5% Calhoun to Algonquin J. Calhoun reflected the show's transition from radio to television, where character names needed to sound more sophisticated for visual presentation, even when the characters themselves remained just as incompetent and scheming as they had been on the radio. Johnny Lee's portrayal of this character became one of the highlights of the television series, as he brought perfect comic timing to Calhoun's legal mishaps and misunderstandings, creating a memorable figure who represented the worst possible choice anyone could make when seeking legal representation. Fact 11. The unprecedented 1966 withdrawal. In 1966, CBS made a decision that had never been made before in television history when they voluntarily withdrew Amos and Andy from both domestic and international syndication sales, becoming the first major network to remove a profitable program from the market due to social pressure rather than poor ratings or financial losses. This unprecedented action marked a turning point in how television networks would handle controversial content and established a new precedent for corporate responsibility in entertainment. The show had been generating steady revenue for CBS through syndication sales since its original cancellation in 1953, airing on local stations across the country and even being sold to international markets where American television content was in high demand. Despite consistent protests from the NAACP and other civil rights organizations throughout the 1950s and early 60s, the network had continued to profit from these syndication deals because the show remained popular with audiences and station programmers. However, by the mid-1960s, the civil rights movement had gained significant momentum and public attention, making it increasingly difficult for CBS to justify continuing to distribute a program that many viewed as perpetuating harmful racial stereotypes. The NAACP had been protesting the show's syndicated reruns for over a decade, arguing that the continued broadcast of these episodes was damaging to the cause of racial equality and African American dignity. The pressure intensified when the NAACP launched major protests in 1961 against discriminatory hiring practices in the television and film industries, leading to congressional investigations and threats to decertify Hollywood unions with the National Labor Relations Board. In this environment, continuing to profit from Amos and Andy reruns became increasingly problematic for CBS's public image and corporate relationships. The network's decision to withdraw the show from syndication was remarkable because it meant giving up a reliable source of income in favor of addressing social concerns, something that major corporations rarely did voluntarily during that era. This action effectively ended the show's availability on American television and international markets, making Amos and Andy one of the first programs to be essentially banned from broadcast due to content concerns rather than regulatory violations or poor performance. The withdrawal also demonstrated how the civil rights movement had gained enough influence by the mid-1960s to pressure major corporations into making significant financial sacrifices in response to social justice concerns. Fact 12. Alvin Childress's post-fame parking cars. After Amos and Andy ended its television run in 1953, Alvin Childress discovered that playing one of the most recognizable characters on early television had actually destroyed his ability to find other acting work, leading to one of the most dramatic career reversals in entertainment history. The actor, who had been the star of a nationally broadcast television series, found himself working as a parking attendant at an upscale Beverly Hills restaurant, a job that required him to help wealthy diners park their expensive cars while they enjoyed meals that probably cost more than his weekly salary. Childress had become so closely identified with the character of Amos Jones that casting directors and producers could not see him as anyone else, making it impossible for him to audition for different types of roles, even though he was an accomplished actor with extensive theater experience. This typecasting problem was particularly severe for black actors during the 1950s, when there were already very few roles available for African American performers, and being associated with a controversial character made the situation even worse. The irony of Childress's situation was especially painful because he had been well-educated and professionally trained long before joining the television series, holding a Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology from Rust College, and having worked with prestigious theater groups like Harlem's Lafayette Players and the Federal Theater Project. He had also operated his own radio and record store in New York City, demonstrating his business skills and entrepreneurial abilities, yet none of this mattered when it came to finding work after the show's cancellation. The parking attendant job represented a complete reversal of fortune for someone who had been earning good money as a television star just a few years earlier, and it highlighted the precarious nature of fame for black entertainers during that era. Childress was not alone in struggling to find work after the series ended, as most of his co-stars also faced similar challenges in transitioning to other projects due to the controversial nature of their most famous roles. Eventually, Childress decided to use his sociology degree and turn to social work, taking a position with the Los Angeles County Civil Service Commission as an unemployment interviewer from 1961 to 1973. This career change allowed him to help other people find jobs while providing him with steady income and benefits, though he occasionally returned to acting with small roles in shows like Perry Mason, Sanford and Son, and The Jeffersons. Fact 13. Tim Moore's forgotten Hollywood legacy. More than 65 years after Tim Moore became one of the first African-American actors to achieve genuine television stardom, his name is still missing from the Hollywood Walk of Fame, representing one of the most glaring oversights in the famous landmark's recognition of entertainment pioneers. Despite Moore's groundbreaking role as the first black actor to become a household name through television and his decades-long career in vaudeville, Broadway, and early media, no one has ever purchased a star to honor his contributions to American entertainment. The Hollywood Walk of Fame, which began in 1960 and now contains more than 2,700 stars honoring various entertainers, has recognized many performers whose careers were far shorter or less influential than Moore's 50-plus years in show business. Moore's career spanned multiple eras of American entertainment, from his early days in vaudeville at the turn of the 20th century through his Broadway appearances in the 1920s and 30s to his pioneering television work in the 1950s. What makes this omission particularly striking is that Moore was not just another performer, but a true television pioneer who helped establish the medium during its earliest years, when most actors were still skeptical about whether television would last or provide sustainable careers. His portrayal of Kingfish made him instantly recognizable to millions of Americans and demonstrated that black actors could carry a television series and attract audiences across racial lines. The process for getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame requires someone to nominate the person and pay a fee, which currently costs around $50,000. But Moore's family members and entertainment industry colleagues have apparently never organized such an effort. This lack of initiative might be partly due to the ongoing controversy surrounding Amos and Andy, which has made some people hesitant to celebrate the show's performers, even though they were groundbreaking artists working within the limitations of their era. The absence of Moore's star becomes even more notable when considering that many of his white contemporaries from early television, including some who had much shorter careers or less cultural impact, have been honored with Walk of Fame recognition. This oversight reflects broader patterns in how the entertainment industry has historically recognized the contributions of black performers, often overlooking pioneers who broke barriers and paved the way for future generations of African American entertainers. Fact 14. The Canadian Bootleg Tour. In 1957, the former cast members of Amos and Andy pulled off one of the most creative legal maneuvers in entertainment history when they performed together for one night in Windsor, Ontario, successfully circumventing CBS's copyright claims by crossing the international border into Canada. This unusual solution came after the network had aggressively shut down the cast's attempted reunion tour in the United States the previous year, threatening legal action against anyone who tried to use the Amos and Andy characters or show name without permission. The original reunion tour had been announced in 1956 and was supposed to feature Tim Moore, Alvin Childress, Spencer Williams, and other cast members performing live versions of their television characters for audiences across the country. The actors had hoped to capitalize on their fame from the show and provide themselves with much-needed income, since most of them had struggled to find steady work after the series ended in 1953 due to typecasting and the controversy surrounding the program. However, CBS quickly stepped in to halt the tour, claiming that the network owned all rights to the Amos and Andy characters and could prevent the actors from performing as those characters in any venue, even live theater presentations. The network's legal threats effectively killed the tour before it could gain momentum, leaving the performers without the income they had been counting on and demonstrating the extent of corporate control over actors' ability to use characters they had helped create. The Windsor, Ontario performance represented a clever workaround that took advantage of the fact that American copyright laws could not be enforced in Canada, at least not as easily as they could be within the United States. By crossing the Detroit River into Canadian territory, the performers found themselves in a legal jurisdiction where CBS's threats carried less weight and where they could perform their characters without immediate fear of lawsuits or injunctions. The single performance in Windsor became a symbol of the cast members' determination to continue working despite the legal obstacles placed in their path by the network that had made them famous. It also highlighted the complicated relationship between performers and the corporations that owned the shows they appeared in, demonstrating how actors could become trapped by their most successful roles and prevented from using their own performances to earn a living. Fact 15. The radio show Paradox. In one of the strangest contradictions in entertainment history, Freeman Gosden and Charles Correll continued performing as Amos, Andy, and Kingfish on radio for 7 additional years after the television version was canceled in 1953, demonstrating that the controversy surrounding these characters was almost entirely focused on their visual representation rather than the content itself. While CBS was facing intense pressure from the NAACP and civil rights organizations to end the TV show, the radio version quietly continued broadcasting with the same storylines, same character types, and same dialect humor that had made the television series so controversial. The radio show not only survived the cancellation of its television counterpart, but actually shared many of the same supporting cast members who had appeared on TV, creating a bizarre situation where actors like Ernestine Wade, who played Sapphire, and Johnny Lee, who played Lawyer Calhoun, continued working with the white creators on radio while being unable to reprise their roles on television. This arrangement meant that audiences could still hear the exact same character portrayals that had been deemed offensive on television, as long as they couldn't see the faces of the performers. The radio version operated under a slightly different format called Amos and Andy Music Hall, which included musical segments along with the traditional comedy sketches, but the core characters and their relationships remained essentially unchanged from what viewers had seen on television. Gosden and Correll continued voicing the main male characters using the same speech patterns and personality traits that had drawn criticism when performed by black actors on the visual medium, yet the radio show faced virtually no organized protest during its final years. This parallel existence revealed that much of the opposition to Amos and Andy was specifically about the visual impact of seeing black actors performing these roles rather than objections to the characters themselves or the storylines being presented. The radio show's ability to continue without controversy suggested that audiences and critics reacted differently to hearing stereotypical portrayals versus seeing them enacted by real people on screen. The radio series finally ended in 1960, completing a 32-year run that had begun in 1928, making it one of the longest-running programs in broadcasting history. The fact that Gosden and Correll were able to maintain their radio careers while the television version became increasingly controversial highlighted the unique power of visual media to intensify social and political reactions to entertainment content.